interrupt this program of dinner music to bring you a special broadcast in the interest of the re-election of District Attorney Walter P. O'Neill.
Hey, no, leave that on, will you, pal?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with deep regret that we are forced to announce that Mr. O'Neill will not be able to address this citizens' forum tonight. Mr. O'Neill was suddenly taken ill, but we are fortunate to have the best-loved civic figure of Iverstown, the gracious Mrs. O'Neill, here in the studio tonight to speak for him.
Citizens of Iverstown, the issues in this election are simple.
That's enough of that malarkey.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Krishna Gade, the co-founder and CEO of Fiddler, which is an explainable AI monitoring company that helps address problems regarding bias, fairness, and transparency in AI. Krishna, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thank you so much. Very excited to share what we are working on, Fiddler.
All right. So there's this, I think, general growing concern about the lack of transparency when it comes to AI algorithms in terms of the way it derives a set of results or recommendation. And really, at the heart of the matter is this potential bias or fairness and the transparency in some of the machine learning models. I think you write about how this is especially noticeable in sectors like healthcare, criminal justice, and other application use cases where bias can be quite prevalent in the data and ultimately the results. Can we truly trust AI, and how do we start to address some of these issues?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. If you kind of think about it, we're truly living under the rule of algorithms these days, right? So our day-to-day activities from news consumption, job search, mortgage financing, they're all being increasingly decided by algorithms. And most of these algorithms are AI-based and are increasingly a black box to humans. So these AI algorithms, when they're created, they're trained on these data sets, which we don't have access to. Organizations can collect data wherever they want to, and they can build an algorithm that can create a model that can start making predictions. Now, without actually understanding how the algorithm is working, without that human oversight, we're almost creating a dystopian view of the world where unfair decisions could be made by unseen algorithms. And that's what motivated us to start Fiddler with the mission to build trust into AI, so that companies can not only take advantage of this amazing new technology that we have, but also do it in a responsible and trustworthy manner. And so in order to help organizations, we are doing building an explainable AI platform that continuously monitors these AI algorithms, for performance issues and bias issues, and reports actionable insights with explanations to the entire organization. And so that is what we are seeing, sort of in terms of the market traction that we are getting. That more and more data science and engineering teams are coming to realize that it's not just important to build and accurate machine learning models, that they need to monitor them and manage their models to ensure risk-free and reliable business outcomes.
All right, so we're going to continue that thought, but let's first kind of introduce the company Fiddler. What exactly does the company do, and how are you looking to address some of these issues?
Absolutely. So Fiddler is an explainable AI platform startup. We are in the San Francisco Bay Area. We help with Fortune 500 companies to ensure responsible AI usage, so that when they are deploying these AI algorithms, they can continuously monitor these algorithms. They can explain these algorithms to a variety of stakeholders from the developers that they've created that created them, but also to compliance stakeholders, to business stakeholders, so that organizations like financial services, recruiting companies, healthcare companies can deploy AI in a risk-free environment and get all the benefits from it. Today we are working with some of the largest banks, some of the largest fintech companies in San Francisco, as well as some great cool tech companies who are advancing the state of AI and helping them to continuously monitor and explain these machine learning models.
And just to understand kind of the scope that we're talking about is when we talk about explainable AI, it doesn't start at the end. It actually starts, and actually it's very much
Right.
involved in every phase of the life cycle, from
Right.
generation, collection, sampling, feature engineering to the actual results.
Right.
Can you talk about that? And also, at some point there's still subjectivity. So if you're looking at data,
Right.
for example, who's reviewing it, and how do you know that that reviewer, or if it's a panel of people, how do you know that their bias isn't getting reflected into the data selection?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, my own journey, right? In the last 2 decades, I spent time building scalable data and machine learning platforms at companies like Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and Microsoft. When I was a search engineer at Microsoft, we would build machine learning models that would predict search result, recommendation for that go when you go into Bing and type a keyword, those results are, ranked by a machine learning model. In those days, it was most important to actually get the most accurate model out that would increase the business metrics, essentially, so that, we can show relevant results. We would not pay attention to things like, is this model biased? Is this actually, treating all of the queries in a similar manner? What is accuracy of it across different queries and whatnot? And so I think similar, I've seen sort of similar pattern exist in many data science teams over the decades. When I was at Facebook, I was leading a newsfeed ranking platform team, and we would launch really complex machine learning models, deep learning models to production. But in the last few years, we have seen this plethora of issues come on board when machine learning models started touching use cases like credit underwriting, job screening, face recognition. And when people discovered this kind of unconscious bias that is creeping into these models, then they started questioning this. Now what's happening is, people are now going back all the way to the training data sets, and they're looking into, how is the training data set? What are the imbalances? Are there any imbalances in my training data? Do we have any sort of, how are we collecting the label data? And then, when they prepare the model, they want to validate, how the model is actually working. What are the top factors that are driving model performance? And this is what we are actually seeing among our customer base, where, they are either building these tools in-house or using tools like Fiddler to sort of get ahead and, start being more responsible through all parts of the machine learning workflow and check for these aspects.
There's so many topics to cover, and I think you start to get into just a few of those. Is that, again, just for the listeners to put some concrete concepts that they can hold on to, is
Right.
that you mentioned credit rating, for instance. So
Right.
based on the data and the algorithms in terms of who gets approved for a credit card, who gets approved for mortgages, HELOCs, and so forth, if the data is biased, it could mean that certain marginalized groups or certain groups of minorities, let's say Hispanics, African Americans, and so forth, may find themselves more likely to be declined or rejected, rather than those that are maybe Caucasian or maybe even male versus female, for instance. And then the same thing goes for not just mortgage, but job applications, right? A lot of the the screening is starting to become more automated rather than the recruiters actually manually sifting through. So there's a host of issues that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about income inequality, resourcing issues, and certain groups just being really left out. And then when it comes to criminal justice aspects, whether it's surveillance video that's at the traffic, for instance, to other things, more likely certain groups of people being pulled over and even having more data set that supports certain behavior that could, put them in custody and ultimately into jail. So a lot of social issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you kind of think about what happened last year with Apple credit card, right? Apple launched this automated credit card system where you go on the phone and you get like a credit card approved, and a credit limit is set by the algorithms, right? So, when they launched this thing, they found that within the same household, a husband and a wife could get 10 times difference in their credit limits. Even though they may have the similar household income, they may have a similar FICO score and whatnot. And the worst part is this was experienced even by the former co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, where he went and publicly tweeted about it and whatnot. So what's happening is when you are training these algorithms, it's very important to understand how they are working. Understand the data, look into the imbalances within the data, check for, why certain, for example, if you're setting a low credit limit, why is it actually setting it? What factors are influencing this quote unquote model or algorithm to make that decision? And that is the hard problem. It's the hard technical challenge because if you're training a very complex algorithm like a neural network with many, many layers, it's very hard to decipher why is it actually making a certain prediction, what contributed to it, what elements of the data actually made that possible. And so that is what explainable AI helps you solve. It helps you answer these series of why questions, starting from, why was this loan denied? Okay, now you say, oh, because the credit risk prediction was not low enough. Now, why is the credit risk prediction so high? And then you can say, oh, because this person has, is requesting for a higher loan amount, or their previous debt was much higher and whatnot. Then you can go deeper and deeper, what other people are like this person that were they denied or they approved. So you can go deeper and deeper into these questions and get more insight, so you can start building trust. And if there are any problems, you can start fixing these algorithms.
That's very interesting. So it's taking it from kind of a high. It's taking it from the end result and then working way to the different tiers of data that you're talking about.
Right.
Going back to kind of the raw data sources is that, some may actually make the argument that, there's nothing we can do because the data sources that we have is the data sources that we have. So using, let's say, the credit card example,
yep.
These financial services companies have years, if not decades, of data, and it is what it is.
Right.
So, and in that data, there are kind of a certain trend line patterns that indicates that certain groups or types of people tend to, get declined more often than not.
Right.
So that's kind of all there. So,
yep.
How do we deal with it? Do we deprecate some of that data, or does the data still remain, but then there's another rationale filter that the lower weights?
I mean, the reality of it is we are not living in a perfectly equitable society, right? And because of various reasons, there are sections of the populations that have been left behind, and we are capturing that data from the society to train these models. So machine learning models are not magic, right? They're basically recognizing the patterns from these historical data sets and trying to predict the future. So now if a certain segment of population has been denied credit for a long time and they don't have large enough credit, then it's very likely that the model predicts, higher credit risk scores for those things, so that they may get rejected more often. So there are several ways to address this problem. You can sort of sample the data set properly. There are techniques now coming up to, generate synthetic examples, so that you can feed the training data set to augment it, right? You can also look at, are there any egregious features in your data set that are completely biasing? Let's say, say zip code. Actually, people found that zip code is has a high correlation in predicting like someone's race or whatnot, right? Should you be using something like a zip code in your models? Or occupation, the type of job could also determine like the gender, in a with a pretty high accuracy. So all of those things, you have to be careful to introduce what features into the model, to eliminate certain features, or reduce the impact of those features, so that you are carefully constructing these models. But more importantly, you have to monitor these models when they're continuously running in production, because just like the model that was just like the sort of how we discussed that models are dependent on data, the data can also change overnight. For example, you may have a model that was trained pre-coronavirus. Now coronavirus has happened, it has destroyed a lot of social dynamic, a lot of people have lost jobs, and you have a completely new lifestyle that has emerged. Now buying patterns, everything has changed, right? So it doesn't matter that your models are still going to run the same manner. People who may, restaurants who may be doing really well could be closed right now, and so they could be filing for PPP loans and whatnot, and so your model could may not do well against certain examples. So it's very important to not only check this once, but also continuously monitor it, so that whenever the model is making predictions, you're recording that and you're understanding what's going on, so you can catch issues quickly.
I think that's a fantastic point that you make, and I couldn't agree with you more. I want to talk about one aspect and then move on to a truly explainable aspect, which is, I think there could be some people that believe that in the case of biased data, for instance, and biased AI, is that are we in fact accommodating that bias in such a way? So let's take a concrete example again, using credit cards as a use case, is if in fact they are adjusting for that bias by allowing for a certain historically declined demographic to be approved for a certain credit card, let's say. And they do that on a for a certain extended period of time, and what they find out is that in fact there's a higher debt, higher
higher risk for the bank,
higher risk for the and maybe even write down for the bank as well.
Right.
So are we potentially getting into those kind of danger zones as well by overcompensating?
Right.
Some may even use affirmative action in some way as an example of that.
Right. So that is the balance that an organization needs to make, right? So that's the responsibility of a chief risk officer or the department to sort of look into, obviously, the primary responsibility of a chief risk officer is to minimize the risks that bank or an organization will take, right? Which means that they need to make sure that, more good loans are, are approved than and fewer bad loans are, sort of are approved, right? And I think you can do that. You have to sort of balance between, are you being equitable across demographics, and at the same time, are you essentially making accurate decisions? So it's not, I don't think it's, you can say that they go against each other. You can still build accurate models which are at least, fairer than, the previous versions of the models that you could have developed. So you can actually always have this, measure fairness and accuracy and make those trade-offs. So in fact, actually a lot of, lending teams already do this today. So where they look at, what they look at is they basically look at for a different, let's say you have a number of models that you develop, you can actually, look at a plot between accuracy and fairness, and you can actually select the best possible models that give you the right trade-offs and launch those models to your, users. So, so they don't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily compromise between the two of them.
So now going to the explainability side a little bit more is, again, there are many cases where an enterprise or some sort of an operation may see slightly different results from the norm.
Right.
You can't quite explain what happened. So let me give a use case where it makes sense to the audience. Let's say, so all of us have before COVID would dine out, right? And even if we went to a favorite restaurant and we would get, let's say, our favorite dish, entree, but depending on which day we went to that restaurant and we ordered the same dish, there will be difference in quality. And of course, we know what's attributing that is because it depends on which chef happens to be working that shift, right? So if you happen to be lucky and you get the chef that works on Saturday, you get the dish that you actually like, and other days you get something else. That's an example of, from the surface, when a business is looking at their operation, everything looks
Right.
normal or average, but then there's
Right.
start to see some anomalies.
Right.
How does your system start to really? You talked about what if.
Right.
Get into
Right.
the depth of X-ray vision to
Right.
understand that it came down to that chef as
Right.
an example.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, a classic example that I can quote is, when the pandemic started, Instacart, which is a grocery delivery company that uses machine learning algorithms for inventory, they blogged about it in saying that they saw their algorithms sharply reduce in accuracy from 90% to like 65% because the entire sort of buying patterns have changed. The data distribution has changed between pre-COVID and post-COVID. So because we're still in the pandemic, we don't know when we are going to come out of it. People are still searching for that baseline. What is the baseline? Because things are changing every day, every week, every day. And so, forecasting your models, supply chain models, pricing models, underwriting models, they all need to be monitored. So Fiddler provides this explainable monitoring capabilities, which essentially help you to understand this model drift. If your predictions are changing over time, we can help you identify, a certain window of time period where they may have dropped, or a certain drift has increased, and you can go and dissect what caused that drift. What is it? For example, in the case of Instacart, it could be a whole bunch of items were out of stock, right? Or people were buying all of a sudden for toilet paper or something, and they're not getting it, or there can be many different things that are happening that could hurt the model performance, and your that can affect your business metrics. And Fiddler helps you glean into those things, and we have developed these explainability techniques that go into the feature set that makes the predictions happen and identify the drift in the feature sets.
So one quick question is, in order for you to be able to have this ability to really drill down into the data,
Right.
Does it mean that your system is basically hooked in or on top of their algorithms as well
Right.
as all the various data sources?
Right, exactly. So it's a pluggable platform, which means that if you're running these models in production, you can attach Fiddler to them, and Fiddler will monitor them continuously and monitor the data that is coming in and out of the models. So all the inputs that the models are getting, the outputs of the models, which are usually the predictions, and then it can monitor the drift in them, the anomalies in them, and you can go and explain. So if you're seeing all of a sudden, if your anomalies are increasing in your underwriting model, you can go and explain each anomaly. Why is this particular prediction so high? Why all of a sudden, what are the reasons that are happening? And that helps you, understand. And sometimes it could be system errors, developer code bugs, data pipeline breakages that are sending bad data. This used to be a common practice at Facebook, where all of a sudden we see like, oh, likes are going up, or comments are going down. Why is that happening? Some developer has introduced a bug, that is sending, bad log data to the models, right? And usually that gets fixed when this alert fires. And sometimes it could be real effects in that happening in the real world, coronavirus or seasonality or something else has happened that you need to capture. And this helps you to go back and fix the model, perhaps retrain it, and relaunch it.
Super. I'm going to ask a rather kind of off topic and recognize that it may be outside of your domain, but nonetheless, I think because we're talking about fundamentally AI around not just the bias, but we talked about explainability, but the fairness issue as well as the transparency issue. And as these AI, and again, I think just to put in the right context is that it's one thing if the AI is just localized to a particular device or system, but we're starting to see systems of systems,
right,
orchestrations of systems, and
right,
superset of AI. So it gets really, really kind of opaque and complex.
Right.
So in that context, according to a very recent study from the Center of Humans and Machines Max Planck Institute in Berlin, they and other researchers believe that superintelligence, or this hypothetical AI agent that possesses intelligence that far exceeds even the brightest and the most gifted human minds, that once it reaches that point, in other words, general artificial intelligence, that AI or AIs cannot be contained.
Yep.
And using computability theory, they can't really find a solution that could contain them, shut them down, or even have a kill switch or set rules that said do not harm. It could not be implemented. What are your thoughts? And I mean, that's the ultimate accountability and transparency of AI, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's different points of views here, right? And I've been working in machine learning for about 20 years now, and I know where it works and where it doesn't work. It's still a human needs to take a bunch of data, train a model, and deploy it so that it can be used on a certain use case, whatever that is. It could be solving a Rubik cube, or it could be predicting a loan risk application. So I think in my experience, what I found is machine learning or AI, whatever you want to call it, it's very good on a narrow task. If you feed it the right set of examples where it can learn how to predict for the future, it can do it really, really well, right? And we have seen it, really beat humans in image classification and whatnot. But I think you still need to define the task that the machine learning model needs to do it, and that is done by the human, right? And so models are not there yet to pick their own tasks and become and start learning from the world and doing it. So there's still a lot of human activity that goes into building these models and defining the tasks that they need to solve and using them. And at the end of the day, you can always have the switch to turn off these models, right? So I don't think like this whole AGI fear is at least as imminent as other people think it is. But one real thing that we need to do control is even these models that we are creating, even the humans that are creating these human applications, they need to pay attention on to how they are building these models. And so we need to hold the organizations accountable so that they are building the right kind of models. And so this is where regulations and legislation need to come, so that if you are for example a financial services company, you need to be ensuring that certain compliance regulations are followed. If you're in a recruiting business, you need to follow certain fairness regulations, and that is very important.
That's a great point, and I couldn't agree with you on that. And on that note, we've been joined by Krishna Gade, who is the CEO of Fiddler. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you so much, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.